in an attempt to try to align better the lab and lecture, all right, that's why I'm putting cellular metabolism online, okay? Because if I do cellular metabolism and I continue with this, we're going to be behind. We're going to be doing histology and integumentary system while you're like going over the skeletal system, the last week of the skeletal system in lab. Okay? So I'm trying to catch up. Okay? Because I think it benefits you the most to have some sort of alignment between lecture and lab. So I'm trying to catch up to get the skeletal system as fast as we can without going too crazy. Okay? And definitely going over the integumentary system before you have your lab exam for that. So that hopefully that kind of helps. Okay? So let's talk. Today we're going to cover chapter 5. We're going to cover tissues. Okay? Tissues, I will call on lab material for this, so pay attention with that. Tissues. Okay? Tissues are groups of cells, all right, groups of similar cells and their extracellular material that do or have a common function. Okay? Example, they provide protection, they provide structural support, they contract, they relay electrical stimulus, you name it. Okay? Who hasn't signed this yet? Okay. We're getting there. Thank you. All right? We have 4 types of tissues. All right? 2 of which you really concentrated on in lab. Right? Epithelial tissue, connective tissue. Epithelial and connective tissue, right, are what you concentrated on in lab, hopefully. And then we have muscle and nervous. Muscle and nervous tissue is what separates animals from higher order animals from others. Okay? Jellyfish, right, they do have some aspect of a nervous system. Okay, so it's different than some lower organisms. Okay? With this, these tissues have varied structure and function. And you would expect that, since we talked about the relationship between structure and function last week, you would expect that depending upon how they are formed, their structure, their function will be different, right? And they're related. Okay? The study of tissues collectively is called histology. A histologist or a histotechnologist, right? They study tissues. They make those microscope slides that you looked at, all right? And you could further go on and study histology, the structure of tissues, and then study the abnormal structure of tissues, which would be more like a pathologist, okay? A pathologist will look at the microscope slides that are of tissues that come from a disease organ and determine whether or not it's a cancerous tissue, or if there's bacteria there, or if there's an abnormal structure, you name it, that's what they look at. Okay? So let's talk first about epithelial tissue, or epithelium. Okay? The epithelium are characterized by closely packed cells. Cells that are almost connected. They are connected to one another in some way. All right? So closely packed cells composed of one or more layers. Okay? What do you remember about one layer? One layer of cells can be a simple epithelium. What is more than one layer? Can be called stratified. Okay? That's our first level of classification when it comes to epithelial tissue, whether it's simple or stratified. Because the cells are so closely packed together, there's little to no extracellular matrix. All right, so we draw it out. I have kind of epithelial cells that are closely packed to one another, and they're attached. There's no space in between these cells. They're attached to this thing at the bottom, and you have nuclei that are present. Okay. In some cases, you may have some little extensions off of the cells. All right, so hypothetical epithelium you find there, that's how many layers of, when I say layers of cells, where am I looking at layers of cells? Well, we're going to get into that as well. All right, so is multiple layers of cells or one, simple or stratified? Where you find epithelium, you'll find them lining body cavities or any exposure, to the outside. Okay? They line the interior surface of your mouth. They line your skin is an epithelium. They line the interior surface of your ears, the interior surface of the nose, of the urogenital tract, right? The rectum, the intestine. They line the esophagus, the stomach, the lungs. Okay, any exposure you have to the outside or anywhere that needs to be protected, you'll find epithelium. All the organs that we talked about the other day, we talked about the serous membranes that line the organs, they're epithelial tissue. Okay? So it also forms the majority of glands. So salivary glands, sweat glands, sebaceous glands. Those are a different type, but a specialized type of epithelium that you probably didn't cover much in lab. But we'll cover more in here. Okay, question on epithelial tissue up to there. So we're going to go through a couple characteristics of, in general. We said they were made up of tightly packed cells. All epithelium has a lot of cells associated with it. Okay? And all the cells, or the tissue itself, has what's called polarity. All right? What that means is one end is different than the other end. Okay? How many of you are familiar with magnets from like middle school or high school physics? All right? Magnets have a north and south pole, right? They're polar because they have one end is different than the other. Same thing with epithelial tissue. One end is of the tissue, which can be one layer of cells or multiple layers of cells, is attached to something, and the other end of that tissue is free or open to something. It's not attached to something. Okay? So that exposed surface, it's exposed to either the external environment or an internal body space. Okay? That's what we call the apical surface. I'm going to draw my hypothetical epithelium again. Okay? My 4 cells. And my nuclei. What A or B would you consider, which one is the apical surface? A. A for apical. Right? What would you consider B to be? The basal surface. All right? So the side that's attached. Right? And do you recall the name of this connective tissue that this cell is attached to? What that's called? From lab? The basement membrane. Okay? So all epithelial tissue at its basal surface is anchored to something. Okay? If you're one of the properties or one of the functions of epithelial tissue is protection. Okay? And it has all of these cells, and it needs to be anchored to something to protect it underneath. It's a lining, it's a barrier, okay? So it's attached to something underneath at the basal surface in order to provide function for those cells underneath, okay? The lateral surfaces, the surfaces on the sides, okay, they have intercellular junctions so that you have junctions between the cells. Okay, different types of junctions, some of which will allow them to communicate with one another, but it also connects one cell to another. Okay, so cell 1 is connected to 2, 2 is connected to 3, and 3 is connected to 4. So now there's no way of me pulling one cell apart. It provides a unique barrier. Okay? So they're connected, right, by what cellular junctions called tight junctions. All right, which actually kind of zips or attaches one cellular membrane to another. So now they function as a complete unit, and nothing can go in between the cells. Anything, any substance that wants to get past this barrier has to go through the cells, and so now this barrier, it can regulate what's in and outside, what's in, what goes in, what comes out. Okay? Question on the basement or the basement membrane basal surface. Okay, if no one says it, move on. Okay, here's your textbook's rendition of a simple columnar epithelium. Okay? When we talk about layers, we're talking about the number of layers of cells between the apical surface and the basement membrane. Okay? In this case, here's your apical surface. Right? Here's your apical surface. Here's the basement membrane. We have one layer of rectangular cells that's separating those two areas. So it's a simple columnar epithelium. Okay? What is absent from the epithelium? What's not there? That is particularly, it's present here in the blood, in the connective tissue. What is drawn here in the connective tissue that is not present in blood vessels? Okay? Another characteristic of epithelial tissue is that epithelial tissue is avascular. That is a V, not a U. Okay? Means it lacks blood vessels. Okay? So no blood vessels, but they are cells and they require energy, glucose, nutrients. How does that epithelium get its nutrients if there's no blood vessels? The blood carries it all around. How does it get there? Diffusion. So it diffuses from the blood here across the connective tissue eventually to the epithelial cells. Okay, so you get diffusion. So understand that the epithelial tissue needs to be supported by something, right? Some other tissue. All right, it has to be anchored and it has to be supported by connective or some other tissue. Okay, so that it lacks blood vessels, avascular, but you know what it does have? It does have nerve endings. So it is what we call innervated. So it has nervous tissue that will relay signals to it. What does it do? Well, it provides protection, right? First off, physical protection from the outside, right? From dehydration, abrasion, destruction, right? From the outside. So it helps protect those things, okay? In many cases where the epithelial exists in a stratified form, stratified meaning what? Means what? Many layers, right? Where in a stratified form, the many layers are present, especially for protection against abrasion. Okay? The mouth and the esophagus are stratified squamous epithelial tissue. Okay? Lots of layers of cells that will help protect the cells underneath. What happens in the mouth? Right? Today's Taco Tuesday, right? I love me some tacos. I like hard shell tacos. Have you ever had eaten a taco really fast and gotten that kind of tortilla shell that goes down kind of the wrong way and gets caught right there? And it hurts, right? It's like, oh. Thankfully, your epithelium is protecting you, and the underlying muscle of your esophagus isn't being ripped by that tortilla shell because of the stratified nature of the epithelium. The outer layer is being taken off, but it's protecting the under layers of cells. Okay? So physical protection. Selective permeability. What does that mean? Yes, sir.
Choosing what materials can come in and out.
All right, so controlling what goes in and out, all right? And because these cells are linked together, they provide that barrier, and it can absolutely regulate what goes in and what goes past, all right? You find this in the intestine, all right? When you absorb nutrients from the food you eat, good things go by and the rest of the stuff doesn't. Okay, everything has to go through the cells, and the cells regulate what is taken up. The amino acids, the carbohydrates that are absorbed. Okay, the lipids that are absorbed. Epithelial cells also form secretions. Okay, they make up the most of your glands. I said sweat glands, sebaceous glands, salivary glands. Those are 3 examples of the type of secretions that epithelial cells produce. Okay? They are specialized epithelial cells that produce those, but they are part of the epithelium itself. Okay? And then sensations. Because they are innervated, they provide for stimuli. They supply information to the nervous system. Okay? Especially temperature, as an example, right? It gets warm, you feel a difference in temperature when you walk into a supermarket on a super hot day. You walk into a supermarket and it's air conditioned in there because you go into the produce section, it's really cold, and you feel that difference, right? Yes? All right, you feel that difference. That's a type of sensation that is relayed, that information is relayed to the nervous system. Okay? Questions up to there? Anyone else? So how do we classify epithelium? I kind of already touched on this. First, we ask ourselves 2 questions. It's very simple. 2 questions. The first question is, how many layers of cells between the apical surface and the basement membrane? Okay? We classify by the number of layers. We said 1 layer of cells was considered to be what? Simple. If I have more than 1 layer of cells between the apical surface and the basement membrane, that is a stratified. Okay? That's your first clue, right? Your first classification. Second classification is based upon the shape of the cell. Okay? The shape of the cell that is at the apical surface. Okay? the shape of the cell at the apical surface. And we have three basic shapes. We have cells that look like pancakes, right? Cells that look like marshmallows, and other cells that look like peanut butter jars. I'm not hungry or anything, I'm just saying, okay? So the flat cells are called squamous, all right? I like this picture of it because it shows you kind of what it looks like. If you were looking from the side, it would look like it's smushed. But if you were looking from the top, it kind of looks like a hexagon. All right, that can throw you off, especially in some of your pictures you're looking at on practice anatomy lab or on the microscope. Depending upon the picture, it might look a little different. All right, but ideally they are flat, kind of spindle shape. In some cases you can't even see them. All right, in some cases they'll look something like this. You might have a nucleus, and it'll look like it's like a line, okay? The thinner the cell, what do you think happens? What did we say? What was the thing that you said that the epithelium were? Selectively permeable. The thinner the cell, what do you think happens easier? Diffusion happens easier, okay? The thinner the cell, the easier for diffusion. And things like oxygen and carbon dioxide, they go past those thin cells really quickly, okay? The thicker the cells get, the longer it takes for certain things to go through, okay? The more selectively permeable they are. Thicker the barrier, okay? So that's squamous cells, right? Easily for diffusion, you'll find them in the lungs, lining the lungs, right? You'll find them lining parts of the kidney where things need to go past really easily. They line blood vessels, etc. All right? Cuboidal are those marshmallow kind of square-looking things. All right? They look like they are equal in height and width. They look like, some say they look like dice. Okay, or die, I guess is the plural. All right? They're equal in height as they are width, a little bit bigger, a little bit thicker than squamous cells, a little bit more selective in what they let through. Okay? And then finally you have columnar cells, which look like shoe boxes, or they look rectangular. Okay, they have greater height than they are wide, and they have a little bit more selective permeability. That you find them in lining the small intestine. Okay? Yes?
So the columnar are like the most selectively permeable?
Yeah, they're the most selective. Okay? Just think about the distance that you would have to go between a squamous cell from one side to the other for things to move, as opposed to a columnar cell. The further the distance something has to travel, the longer it takes, or the more difficult it is to cross that barrier. Okay? For the most part, you will find the most abundant or most often seen stratified type of epithelium is a stratified squamous epithelium. Okay? There are some places where you will find a stratified cuboidal or a stratified columnar epithelium, but those two are pretty rare. All right, you'll find them lining the urogenital tract of males and females in some glands, but they tend to be pretty rare. Okay, that's why in lab we basically didn't even go over them, right? All right, so here's the little flow chart to tell you kind of where things are. Okay, now there are exceptions to every rule, right? And there are two exceptions to our classification rule. Okay, our two exceptions. One is right here, pseudo-stratified columnar. What does pseudo mean? False or fake. So it's that word pseudo-stratified means fake stratified. So it's going to be false. All right? It's going to look stratified, but it's really not. And what that looks like is that you have these, I'll kind of draw it out here, pseudo-stratified down here. You have cells that extend from one to the top okay. Say if those are the cells and these are the nuclei, what would you think that looks like in blue? Would you think those are multiple layers of cells? Just going by the nuclei you see there in blue. Here we go. There we go. Why would you think that's stratified?
Because the nuclei don't line up.
So the nuclei don't line up, okay? If you can go by nuclei and look at, are there multiple layers of nuclei from the apical to the basement membrane, you can think, all right, you can conclude it could be stratified, okay? And in this case, it kind of looks like that, right? Well, these cells, and this one's going to be really hard to tell, right? They look stratified, but really, as you can see here, this is, I'll do it in green. This cell is extending from the apical surface to the basement membrane. So there's really only one layer of cells. Because of the way they're kind of intertwined, they look like they could be stratified. Okay? That is pseudo-stratified epithelial tissue. Okay? The other exception to the rule is transitional. Okay? And this, yes, sir.
Sorry, where would pseudo-stratified normally be found?
You'll find pseudo-stratified epithelium lining the trachea. Okay? Typically, they'll have, they'll also be ciliated. All right? I don't know of any other place where they're found. So you find them in the trachea, they're ciliated, and they produce mucus, and the ciliator move the mucus up to the throat where the mucus can be ingested. Okay? The other exception to the rule is transitional epithelium. What's a transition?
Change from one thing to another.
Change from one, you're moving from one thing to another. You're transitioning from a first-year student to a second-year student, right? So you're moving from one to another. That's what's happening here. In this transitional epithelium, you go from one kind of morphology, one status, to another, and then back, okay? So under one status, you may have an epithelium that kind of looks like this, with all of these cells that are bunched up, okay? You have all these nuclei inside the cells, all right? And here's your basement membrane. Does that, here, I'll make that bigger because I can't even see it. Okay? Does that look like it would be a stratified epithelium? You have multiple layers of nuclei and multiple layers between the apical surface and the basement membrane. Yeah. But you're looking at it only under one particular state. Okay? In this case, we're going to transition to cells that look like this. So in that second state, it looks like it's a simple epithelium, a simple squamous epithelium, right? But then it goes back and forth, all right? Transitional epithelium can be found in the bladder and in other places in the urinary tract, okay? Think about what the bladder does. It has to expand to store urine, okay? It expands, and then when you void your bladder and go to the bathroom, it contracts and pushes the urine out. And so, but it still needs to maintain that boundary where the urine is and keep it separate from the underlying tissue. So it transitions from one to another. Okay? The other states, so we have simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, pretty straightforward. Pseudostratified we went over, transitional we went over. We said stratified cuboidal and columnar are rare, okay? And finally, we have the stratified squamous, multiple layers, but they come in two different flavors. The stratified squamous can be either keratinized or non-keratinized, all right? A keratinized stratified squamous is your skin, okay? Skin, your hair, your fingernails. The outside, the most outer layer are actually cells that are dead and they've been filled with a protein called keratin, okay? So the cells die off and the nucleus goes away and the cells are filled with keratin to help better protect the underlying tissue, okay? The non-keratinized stratified squamous are what's found kind of lining the mouth, right? Your nasal passages, right? Parts of the vagina, right? The cells on the apical surface are alive. It's still stratified squamous, but the cells are not filled with keratin. They are alive at the apical surface and help protect the underlying cells. Okay? Questions on epithelial tissue and their structures? All right, so we also said that epithelial tissues also produce and form glands. Okay? Glands can be individual cells or multicellular organs. They are mainly composed of epithelial tissue and some more specialized epithelial tissue from there. All right, they can kind of be differentiated a little bit. Glands secrete substances that are used elsewhere or for elimination. So give me an example of a substance that can be used elsewhere that's in the body. It's a gland. What system would have a substance that's produced one place but acts somewhere else? Close. What controls the reproductive system? The endocrine system. Okay? Hormones. Okay? Such as the thyroid hormone or any of the pituitary hormone. Like think about that stuff is going to be produced and secreted into the blood and then it goes other places. Okay? So hormones. Some glands will produce mucin. Mucin's a protein which is abundant in mucus. All right, electrolytes, calcium ions, sodium ions, potassium ions, chlorine ions. Just talked about hormones. Enzymes, all right? Even your sweat has enzymes in it. Has enzymes that will break down bacterial cell walls. Okay, tears come from the lacrimal gland, which comes from epithelial tissue, right? And tears have enzymes in it as well, antibacterial enzymes. All right, and then urea or nitrogenous waste. Right, your kidneys are abundant in epithelial tissue, right? Especially the glands, which will produce urea. So we have endocrine glands versus exocrine glands. These glands differ in one area. The question you ask yourself is, where does the secretion, where does what's produced end up? Does it stay inside the body or does it end up outside of the body? Okay? In the case of thyroid hormone, it's produced by the thyroid, secreted into the blood, and it goes to the target organs. It never leaves the body. Okay? Pituitary hormone, or pituitary gland, okay, produces a number of hormones that go into the blood, but they all stay inside the body. Okay? Those are endocrine glands. Endo means in. Crine means secretion. Okay? So secretion inside the body. As opposed to exo means out or outside. Outside secretion. So what they're going to produce is going to end up outside of the body. Okay? Typically there's a duct that ends up outside the body. What is secreted that we've kind of talked about that ends up on the outside surface of the body? Sweat. Right? Sweat are exocrine glands. Okay? Sebum, sebaceous glands are exocrine glands. Okay? Mammary glands that produce milk ends up outside the body. Salivary glands. All right? Those are all duct and they tend to end up outside the body in one way or the other. Okay? So endo versus exocrine. All right, so let's talk about some structures of glands. They can be unicellular exocrine glands, all right, or they could be the glands can be one cell, or they can be multiple cells. All right, one cell glands are called, the most common type are called goblet cells. All right, and I put this little picture at the bottom there. You may have seen these last week in lab when you were looking at the pseudostratified epithelium or even in the columnar epithelium. Okay, in the small intestine. You have these goblet cells, and in the trachea, goblet cells, a unicellular gland that's producing mucus. It's producing mucus that is going to help protect the underlying tissue. Okay, or help protect and allow for the digested food that's in your small intestine to pass easily. Okay, so the unicellular glands, this is what it looks like over here on the right. Right here, goblet cell. Right, so here's microvilli, little folds, but you have the secretory vesicles inside that contain mucin that's going to be secreted off the top and eventually on the cell surface. All right, most of the common type is the goblet cell. All right, we also have down here, you see these are pseudostratified epithelium. The lighter pink or lighter purple areas you see there, those are goblet cells. All right, and another example of goblet cells that are inside a pseudostratified epithelium. All right. Multicellular exocrine glands, multiple cells, numerous cells. They have acini, all right, or an acinus, are cell clusters that produce secretions. So it's not just one cell, it's a cluster of cells that are going to produce secretion into the duct, and the duct ends up outside the body. Okay? And it's surrounded by a fibrous capsule. All right? Examples, you have septa, partition gland into lobes. Salivary gland is an example of a multicellular exocrine gland. Okay? And you have this kind of lobes and a fibrous capsule that helps protect it. Here's a structure of the multicellular glands. All right. So a multiple duct. Each of this, here's the acinus, which produces what will be released. It goes into the duct, and then the duct, or the conducting kind of collects, and then is moved out of the duct down kind of more tubes, eventually out to the body. Example, this is the structure of the mammary gland. Okay, the acinus, milk is produced in the acinus and then is transported down the duct, eventually out of the body. Now those glands come in some different structures. Look at that, they get kind of funky up there, right? So we have simple tubes, kind of acinus at the end, an unbranched duct, it's just a tube. And then we have a branched tube, multiple acinus to one tube. We can coil that tube. This is what eccrine sweat glands are, right? It's kind of coiled up, but produce the, along the tube, you produce the secretion eventually gets out of the body. A simple acinar, so you have the acinus, no tube, a very short duct, and then you have the branched acinar, multiple branches at each connected to a short duct. Then from there, they can become compound. And then they get really complicated. Compound tubular. The duct, what's different here? The duct is branched, not the acinus. Okay, here the acinus has different parts. Here the duct has different parts. Okay, and that's a compound tubular, a compound acinar, and a compound tubulo-acinar. It's kind of a mix of the other two. Okay, I'm not really going to ask you to be able to identify each of those on exam, but understand that they are different in structure. Different in structure and they're different in function. Why do you think they're different in function? Which of these glands do you think produces more secretion from the acinus? The more complex, the more, right? The more acinar, or acini plural, that a gland has, the more secretion that can be produced. Okay? So the more complex, the more the abundance of secretion. They also differ in how the secretion is released. There's a couple different ways, right? What's called the merocrine gland versus an apocrine gland versus an holocrine gland. Again, crine means secretion. Okay? So how is this secretion produced? In the merocrine gland, you have release of the secretion from the cells. The cells release the protein or the substance by exocytosis. Okay? It's pretty straightforward. Okay? That's salivary gland as an example. Okay? The second one, the apocrine gland, all right? There's a pinching off of the apical portion of the cell itself. All right? So the secretion's a little bit different. It's not just by exocytosis. Part of the cell goes with it. It's broken down and it's released. And then finally, the holocrine gland, the cells actually are filled with the secretion and then they die off and break up, and that's how the secretion is released. It's a little different, okay? So in the holocrine gland, the cells actually die and then they're replaced. That's sebaceous gland. The type of how the secretions are produced also can be the reason why what's inside the secretion, right? You may have talked about ecrine versus apocrine sweat glands in lab last week, right? And we'll talk about them next week. Apocrine sweat glands are found in the axillary region and in the genital region of the body, armpits and groin, okay? They are not active until puberty. Okay, and the sweat that's different from your armpits is different. The sweat from your armpits is different from the sweat from your forehead and the sweat from your arms. Okay, because it has different structures, it has different contents, because of how the sweat is released from the glands themselves. Okay? Questions on epithelial tissue? I think epithelial tissue is pretty straightforward. Classification gets a little hairy when we talk about glands, but if you just review it, you should be good. Connective tissue is a whole different story. Sorry. Thought it was all going to be easy. It's just not. Okay? Connective tissue is more diverse than epithelial tissue. All right? And in terms of shape, structure, and function. Okay? It is the most diverse, abundant, and widely distributed of tissues. Even though epithelial tissue is found lining all your organs and stuff like that, connective tissue is actually makes up all your organs, right, in some way. Overall, its function is to support, protect, and bind organs together. All right? And it's made up of basically three things. All connective tissue is composed of cells that are separated by some type of what we call ground substance, some type of material. All right? That material can be fluid, it could be semi-solid, it could be solid. But regardless, the cells that make up that tissue are separated from each other. They are not necessarily connected the way epithelial tissue is. Okay? And then the third thing that all connective tissue has is some type of fiber. Okay? At some point, there is a protein fiber that is present in the tissue that gives it its strength and helps it support. Okay? Some examples: tendons and ligaments. Tendons connect muscles to bone. Ligaments connect bones to bone. All right? Adipose tissue kind of just fits in wherever it helps to protect organs and insulate the body. Cartilage, all right, that helps protect bones, connects bones to bones together or separates them. Bone itself is a connective tissue, all right? And it is a solid connective tissue. And then finally you have the blood. The blood is a connective tissue. Blood is a fluid. All right? And I said the one thing that I said one of the things that is present in all connective tissue is fibers. Where do fibers come up when we talk about blood? How does the blood have fibers? What happens to you after? All right, think about it for a minute. Think about it. Think about where are the fibers going to happen? They're going to come up. Hold that thought. You would have a thought. Talk to your neighbor about said thought. Go ask Kyle. All right. So, where do the fibers come together in blood? Where do you find the fibers? Anyone? What did you guys talk about? Okay.
We had like to form blood clots, so get cut.
To form clots. Okay? When it is a function of the plasma of blood, okay? The plasma has soluble proteins, but when you get a cut, it exposes parts of the cell that then turns the plasma proteins and they start to form fibers to clot blood. All right? So clotting That's where the fibers are found. Okay? And blood, obviously, is the fluid extracellular matrix. Bone is the solid, and then these others are kind of semi-solid. All right, so all connective tissue shares three basic components: cells, protein, fibers, and ground substance. All right, and we can classify the cells within a connective tissue based on whether or not they're there or they're kind of wander in between. All right, in some connective tissue, like areolar connective tissue, you have cells that produce the fibers that are stuck there. Okay, those are resident cells, and you have other macrophages and mast cells that kind of move in and out. Those are wandering cells. They kind of move between. Okay? Most cells are not in contact with another. They're separated by stuff. It's much different than epithelial tissue. Okay? So your resident cells are stationary. They're housed there. They support, maintain, and repair the extracellular matrix itself. Examples: fibroblasts. Fibro means fiber. Blast is anytime you see blast, that means a cell that produces something. Okay? A cell that produces something. In this case, usually it's what's before it. So blasts, right? It's going to produce fibers. It's going to produce the fibers. Okay? They tend to be flat, tapered ended. They're most abundant in the connective tissue proper. And they produce the fibers and ground substance you find in extracellular matrix. All right. Adipocytes or adipocytes, depending where you put the emphasis on the wrong syllable. Okay. Adipocytes, they're fat cells. They appear in kind of clusters. They could be found in some types of connective tissue proper. They're usually, you'll find fat cells within the hypodermis, the underlying layer of skin, all right? And you'll find them in large clusters, all right, in adipose connective tissue. And then your wandering cells, they continually move through. Okay, leukocytes, they repair parts of the extracellular matrix. Really, the wandering cells are cells of the immune system that go through and they see what's kind of going on, and they maintain your health, right? They protect the body from harmful agents. Mast cells are one type of wandering cell. They're an immune cell. Go through. They pretty much stay close to blood vessels. They secrete histamine to dilate blood vessels. So that mast cells are important for your allergic reactions things, right? I'm allergic to cats. Anytime I go near cats and I get scratched by a cat, like my skin gets really red and puffy because of a mast cell that's been exposed to a cat allergen is reacting and secreting like histamine, and it gets swollen, inflamed, and that's why I don't have cats. Okay? Plasma cells are also an immune cell. They produce antibodies. All right, that help immobilize foreign agents and help protect your body. We'll talk much more about these when we get through the immune system next semester. All right, characteristics of connective tissue. Protein fibers. Not now. Okay, protein fibers, couple different types. You have thick fibers, thin fibers, and then these net-like fibers. All right, the thick pink that you see in the left panel, over here, you may see a fiber. I'm going to outline it in black as an example. Okay, let's actually do it in blue so you can see it. Here's a fiber that goes like this. A pink fiber right there. Okay, see that pink fiber that's outlined in blue? Almost looks like that whole tissue should be pink, but there's actually strands that run through there. That's a collagen fiber. Okay, and then it's also outlined right here. Here's another one, a collagen fiber. Okay, collagen provides strength and elasticity, some resiliency, so that you can pull your cheek, stretch it out, and it goes back. All right, and over time, collagen breaks down, and it gets less structural integrity, and you end up with folds where your skin goes, and those are your wrinkle lines. Okay, the hair-like fibers you see there looks like strands of hair in my shower because of my daughters. No, I'm just kidding. Are elastic fibers. All right, they allow for spring back of things, right? Stretch and kind of return. All right, so we have elastic fibers and collagen fibers, and then we have these net-looking ones, are reticular fibers. They extend out and they have this netting, they hold things in. All right, these are all lymphocytes that are flowing through a lymph node, and they're being caught by this reticular fiber net, and they get stuck there for a little bit so that they can do their job as an immune cell. Okay, so 3 types of protein fibers that strengthen and support tissue: collagen, reticular, and elastic. Not all fibers are found in all connective tissue. You may find collagen in one, elastic in the other, reticular in a third. They may have some of both, right? But they are present, right? Some of those fibers are present in all connective tissue. Ground substance is the stuff that separates cells. It can be solid, semi-solid, or a fluid, right? We call viscous, blood, a semi-solid cartilage, and the solid is bone. Okay? Ground substance is different than protein fibers, but them together is what we call the extracellular matrix. All right? So the fibers and the ground substance, that is collectively called the extracellular matrix. Okay? That ground substance is made up of what we call glycosaminoglycans, or GAGs. Glycos, yeah, that face is all it says right there. She's like, I gotta write that out. Glycos, this part, means sugar. Okay? Amino refers to amino acid. And then glycans goes back to sugar. Okay? So really what this is an amino acid that has 2 different carbohydrate pieces attached to it. All right? It's a long chain. It's a large molecule. It's made up of carbohydrate building blocks attached to amino acids, or amines. All right? Amines means NH2 groups. Okay? They are negatively charged, and what does this mean? Attract water. Okay? These GAGs, they are hydrophilic. The charge attract cations, negatively charged particles, okay, or positively charged particles, I'm sorry, which then also attracts water. So when you have all of these, an abundance of glycosaminoglycans present, they're going to attract a lot of water. Okay? what happens to your skin when you get dehydrated? Hmm? It dries out. What happens to a raisin? What is a raisin? It's a dried out grape, okay? When your skin gets dehydrated, you get kind of sunken in, right? Your skin isn't have the right tone. That's why they say drink 8 ounces of water, 8 glasses of water a day, so nice tone on your skin, right? So that all of that water can be held in the skin, or in the glycosaminoglycans, in the gags, to give your skin that kind of radiant feel. And I know this is, I'm going to drink water after that. Okay? Also, other things. Proteoglycans. So now we have glycosaminoglycans that are now, if we link one of those to a protein, now it's called a proteoglycan. All right? This is a large structure due to negative repelling. They do a bunch of different properties. I'm not really concerned so much that you know what they do. Just they are present there, okay? And it's kind of way of anchoring and holding those glycosaminoglycans in where they need to be. And then finally we have this adherent glycoproteins, right? Proteins attached to a carbohydrate, all right? Those, they actually help bond the connective tissue cells to the fibers and the ground substance. This includes fibronectin, fibrillin, and laminin. These are outside of the cells, and they allow for attachment, how those cells attach to what's outside it, okay? How it attaches to the fibers, how it attaches to the other ground substance, say in bone or in cartilage. How does that happen? That's the protein molecule that's present there that allows that to occur. Okay, so ground substance, pretty complicated. It helps store water, right? It's made up of glycosaminoglycans and how they're arranged. Connective tissue is very diverse. I'm not, on your exam, going to ask you to identify the connective tissue. You're doing that in lab, okay? So you're not going to have a picture of connective tissue and be like, what type of connective tissue is this? All right, but you should know the basics, the characteristics of it, etc. Okay? And you have, this is kind of the thing, brings them all together. Resident cells versus, you have a macrophage may or may not be a resident cell, right? The fat cell will be, the fibroblast will be, the mesenchymal cell will be, right? But the macrophage can kind of come in and out. You have your fibers, your ground substance is everything else in between those fibers, and you have cells that are present, separated by that ground substance. Okay? Questions on connective tissue or epithelial tissue?